Hello there. This week I'd like to talk about career decision making, both for the short term and the long term. You know, a couple of generations ago, careers were a very different thing. You probably were hired by one company and maybe worked your whole life for that company. Then things moved on and changed, and maybe you worked in a field for the next generation, and you might have maybe worked for two or three companies, but you still stayed in your same field. And then, sort of next generation, people started moving between fields. And currently, people estimate that you probably will work in three or four different, complete and total different fields with job changes of some kind, either through promotion or relocation or those kinds of things every probably 2 to maybe 3 years. That's a lot to manage. And it really is about managing. It's about the long term managing your career and developing it and helping it to become what you want it to be. You are an active and live participant in it, guiding and steering your ship towards where you want it to go. Rather than allowing things to just happen to you. You have to remember that you are never as stuck as you may feel you are. If you get into a situation where you don't like where you're at, you have the opportunity to continue to manage and move your career along. So we're going to look at a couple of different ways to kind of tackle managing your career. It might be helpful to have a little bit of basic career theory. There are a few major theories out there, some of which you might have heard of. Career theory really started with a guy named Parsons and his trait and factor theory. So he would look at certain traits that people had and look at descriptions of different jobs and try to match them. This is very much coming out of a sort of folks who would come out of the military that he was trying to help place, and he would say, okay, here's what the career says it needs, here's what the person has for skills, it should be just a match. And then it moved on towards more sophisticated things. You may have heard of Holland codes. And Holland was a great theorist who really looked at these 6 different code areas. He talked about people having interest in artistic areas or social areas or enterprising areas, conventional, investigative. And so he allowed for people to have a little bit more of a complex way of looking at things rather than one set of traits and factors. Instead, he would look at these code areas and he would say, okay, you are an EAS, enterprising, artistic, social person, and that combination does well in fields like this. And you'll find this. The Holland codes are the basis for probably 80% of the quizzes out there that you might find online that people use Holland codes to try to figure out different careers. There was a guy named Donald Super who really tried to be more sophisticated in his looking at the way that careers develop over time. And so his is really a developmental theory of stages that says, you know, during their 20s, people may be looking at for this, and then they move on to being more at a sort of building phase, and then they go on through different stages throughout their career in terms of what's a good fit for them. So that's a big one. In later years, a really interesting theory was happenstance, which was done by John Crumboltz. Happenstance is a really interesting idea that basically says rather than planning a career, get out there and make things happen. Get out there and try something. The worst thing you can do is be frozen and just stuck where you are. You're always better off going and trying something, seeing if you can do an interview, seeing if you can meet with somebody, informational interview, volunteer, do something that will prompt things to happen to you, and then through happenstance, the right opportunities will come to you. So there are lots of different theories that you can use and work on to manage your career. But I think the long term is ideas that you're not just looking for a first job. You're looking for a long-term succession of jobs that may propel you to whatever it is your goals are. And now that you've spent some time planning and thinking about what those goals look like, you have to figure out, okay, how do I manage my step-to-step? And I think a lot of it is keep thinking about sort of a yardstick concept where you can always measure what that next step is. You look and you say, okay, I'm in this field, I'm in this particular job. Here are the skills that I love to use. Here are the strengths that I think are my best ones, right? You should know those and be familiar with those. Here are my values and what I want to be doing. Okay, how much of my time do I spend using those in my current situation? You know, am I working in my strengths 60% of the time, 80% of the time, 20% of the time? And then you look at the new job opportunity and say, okay, from the best that I can tell of what that job is going to be like, what percentage of time would I be using my strengths there? 20, 60, 80? and you measure and say, okay, could that be a good jump for me? Could that be a good change of pace if it's going to be a better match in that way? And then you look also at things like your values and say, does this opportunity propel me to my values? You go back to your longer and plan, and you say, where would I like to be, and how am I going to get there, and does this serve that? Which is an important thing about planning. I definitely recommend that people sit down and say, where would I like to be in these sort of short-term goals, mid-term goals, long-range goals? I've always done that. I've found it really helpful. Sometimes I have been on track with what I suggested and thought about for goals. Sometimes I have missed those goals. Sometimes I've made other ones or gone earlier. I remember at the early part of my career saying, by the end of my career, if I could get to this, monetary salary, that would just be amazing. Well, I passed that several times over. I've probably doubled what I originally put down for that. And so, things change, but that's okay. And other things that I didn't meet up with, or I put a particular goal for a title that I really wanted, and I thought that was the big thing. And then, I've since moved on twice for titles. So those kinds of things may happen, or you may turn and go in a different direction. But still, having that goal set, having that little decision tree of where you think you'd like to be, again, in which decade, 10 years from the start of my career, I'd like to be doing these kinds of things, using these kinds of skills with these people in this possible title, making this possible salary. That's great. The next 10 years of my life, I think I'd rather focus on these skills, and I'd like to build this. Maybe, you go from being a great particular worker and skilled and recognized for those skills to becoming in the next 10 years a skilled manager or a leader of teams of people. Maybe then you become a senior manager and you lead whole organizations or parts of organizations. And then, maybe later in life you decide, I'd really like to be a consultant, and I'd like to come back and work with people in a very different light. So think about at each sort of maybe 10-year mark where you would like to be in your career, and measure your progress. And maybe you have some branches that come off that. Maybe you say, well, I think in 20 years I'd either like to be doing this or this. I'd like to use these skills, but with this type of company in the education field, or this type of company in the for-profit world, or nonprofits, or whatever it is. But having that tree and being able to go back to that is a helpful thing. I've found I often will do that every time I think about a job change or make a job change. I'll go back to that original one that I wrote and say, oh, how am I doing? In my little life sort of plan, am I on? Am I off? Was my timing close to right? Have I changed my mind about what skills I would really like to use, or who I'd like to serve by using those skills? So I think that can be a really helpful tool. I've introduced a couple things to you this week, a couple of resources that I think you might like, that I want you to work on and then share back with me. One of the things is a little quiz that I call the Purpose Finder, that was part of a book that I wrote. The book was called What's Your Function? And this quiz just, I think, teases out sort of that sort of life purpose idea that people have. And it's the idea that you really, were born with a purpose, with certain sort of fingerprints on you of what it is that you do best and what you were built to do. And so if you can look at what those pieces are, it can really help you. So these are a series of questions that I like to ask when I've done seminars on this. So go through, answer the questions, send me your questions. I'd love to just give you a little bit of feedback based on what I see in those questions and some themes that might pop out of your life to help you develop a little bit of a purpose statement about who you might serve and that kind of thing. I'm also sending you a resource called the Career Options Matrix. This is a little exercise kind of thing to do. There's a set of instructions, and then you basically use this grid to think about, okay, what kinds of fields might you like to go into? And then using your grid, you're able to kind of work down and say, how much do I know about this opportunity, and what do I think about what I know? Do I like what I know, or am I not so sure about what I know? How can I learn more? And then how can I reevaluate and judge whether or not my process is bringing me closer to that as a possible career, or further away from that? What do I need to know about what it takes for education or training, or those kinds of things that I think you can do? So definitely do that one too. And the last thing I would add is to, you're looking at some career handouts this week, some stuff about decision making and goal setting. But the last trick that I would use in terms of determining whether a field might be the right one for you is what I call the professional development test. So, if you think about it, all fields have professional development. This might be you go to additional education, you take seminar courses, you do self-study, you learn new pieces of software, you read, you keep up with your industry, whatever it is that you like to do. One of the best and easiest tests that you can do to figure out if a particular field might be a good match for you is to say, what is the professional development for that field? If I wanted to be great in that industry, what would I have to do to keep my skills sharp? And once you find that out, you ask yourself, would I like to do that? So if you can't imagine yourself going to a technology or sales conference, if that sounds horrible to you, then that's not the right field for you. But if you look and say, oh, I'd love to continue to take courses in this area. I'd love to study languages on the side, and this is what this requires. Well, then great. That professional development is good for you. I'd love to read up and keep track of trends in my industry. That just sounds fascinating to me. Or, going to conferences or taking online courses or whatever it is for that discipline that is going to make someone great over time if they continue to study. If that is something that draws you and pulls on you and you say, wow, I'd love to do that. That sounds like fun to me. That's a great sign. If, on the other hand, whatever that professional development is sounds like drudgery, then think about that, because you're not going to enjoy really fine-tuning your skills and honing your skills, and that's going to make it hard for you to really be excellent in your field if you hate the professional development that goes along with it. So think about that as you consider careers. Try out the different, take a look at the handouts, try the different exercises, send those to me via the Moodle account, and I'll take a look at them and try to give you some feedback. So enjoy your week and your career decision-making process.